Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. I'm Lisa Sanchez, I'm Mexican, and fighting the war on drugs, and I share hope.
Welcome to I Share Hope, the podcast where world leaders share their real stories of hope and how you can use actionable hope to start changing your life today. And now, here's your host, Chris Williams.
Lisa, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, this is Chris Williams. So good to talk to you. There you are.
Good to hear you.
So you're in Mexico right now. What city?
I am, Mexico City.
Mexico City, fantastic. Man, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know you have a lot on your plate.
No, it's fantastic. I'm super glad and actually quite proud of being part of this project.
Oh, that's sweet. I'm so glad you are. Well, let me tell everybody who's listening a little more about you. So Lisa Sanchez, and I was reading your bio a little while ago. We read it a month or two ago when we tracked you down. But if I get this right, you have a degree in international relations from a university in Mexico in Paris, a degree in political science from University of Paris, a degree in public management and governance from the London School of Economics, and you're the director of Latin American programs for drug policy reform and Latin American associate expert for the International Drug Policy Project. And it goes on from there. And
Lots of drugs.
Lots of drugs, yeah. Either you had a really crazy college experience and you kept going back, or you learned a lot.
No, it's actually I never actually imagined that I will dedicate my life to the drug policy issue. But as it turns out, living in Mexico, you have very few options of other policy fields in which extra help is needed, really.
Mm-hmm. You know, as I'm looking back at your past history and what you've done before all of this, a very deep set of roots in human rights issues around the world. You've done a great job with that. And so I see how you're tackling the drug issues from a human rights perspective, not just a crime perspective. And I'm absolutely fascinated with that because it's a fresh look at it. It really is.
Yeah, well, I started, I have all of those degrees, and I always knew that I wanted to dedicate my life to the public sector and to somehow creating some sort of public value. But I never thought that this particular topic will actually take the entire agenda and the entire life out of me. But I started also as a youth activist quite soon in human rights related issues. So I think that's what made me bring this new perspective into the debate on drugs. Because I made a lot of, I was part of, networks, international network and other organizations working on sexual and reproductive health and rights and in gender issues. I was part of the first youth cohort of an international organization called Women Deliver that, tackles women's issues and whatnot. And when I started figuring out what harm reduction meant and what drug policy meant in Latin American countries and in particular in Mexico, I definitely decided that I wanted this to become my professional topic and that I wanted a career on this. But that I wanted more than just continue this conversation on why drugs are bad and why drug-related crime is also bad. I wanted to talk more about the violence that's committed by state actors. I wanted to talk about the human rights violations that are enabled by this rhetoric and this global discourse about drugs being the next evil, to tackle. Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to count the costs on all of the consequences that a country like mine is actually paying and suffering from declaring a war on drugs that are not necessarily consumed here, that it's not necessarily our problem, or at least it's not only our problem. Mm-hmm. Yet we, are experiencing these levels of violence and death that are totally unacceptable to me.
Well done, well said. So I'm a huge fan of Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if you've read any of his books. He's got some really interesting stuff because he looks at lots of issues in the world, from education to crime to how our streets are laid out, from angles that we don't usually look at it. And you've flipped the arguments around, not to ignore the fact that drugs can harm people, because nobody's arguing that, but you flipped it around to say, hey, are we really focusing our attention on the stuff that's going to help the world and the larger populations and it's bringing some good stuff to it. It's bringing a great light to the conversation. So thanks.
Yeah, exactly. It's not when you advocate for drug policy reform, it's not that we're advocating for drugs. We're not pro drugs. Nobody's saying that. There's all kinds of risks and harms that could be associated to drugs. But in particular now, the context is more, it's more proper and it's more advanced to talk about all of the consequences that are not directly associated to drug consumption, but rather to drug policies. How are we managing this global market that it's so profitable and that gives criminal organizations so much power to then challenge state actors and society at large? So that's kind of what we're doing, and we're really hoping that more people can join this global conversation.
I love it. You're doing it. I think it's happening.
I hope
you.
so.
Thanks for being
Otherwise,
a leader.
I've been wasting my time.
You're not wasting your time. Nobody would say that. All right, so Lisa, you know what we're doing here. We are asking 1,000 leaders of hope from around the globe the same 5 questions about hope. And this is your time to talk. It's not mine. It's not anybody else's. We want to know what you think about this topic and how it's impacted your life. Not just what you do professionally, but really you as a person, because you have a unique vantage point on it. So can I ask you these questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, Lisa Sanchez, here's number 1. What is your favorite quote about hope or your definition of hope?
Well, I found this quote a bunch of years ago, actually. That's from Václav Havel, and it's a definition that I really, really like. And it says, hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. And I really, really love it. Because it still has this positive vibe about hope that it's, aspirational somehow. It's giving you the strength and it's giving you the courage to continue in a path, but not necessarily because you have the certainty that it's going to turn out well for you or as you imagine, but just because it's right. Or because it feels good and you're convinced that something's good regardless of the result. And so I think that the magic of this particular quote is that it's positive without being utopic, but at its core it has, to me, this definition at its core, it's all about agency. It's all about individuals and communities being empowered and convinced that they have a way to go and that they're going to work for it. And that's why I really, really like this in comparison to many other definitions of hope.
Well said. Thanks. So with that framework of hope then that we have, who has impacted your life with that kind of hope? Who's actually given that to you?
Well, many people, of course, but if I had to mention just one, it would definitely be my mother, and for many reasons other than she's just awesome and she's my mom. But because she is kind of like the person that consolidates all of these qualities of the definition. She has been the strongest and most resilient person I've ever met. But she has also given me this courage and this strength to continue going to where you want to go, no matter what the result, and really against all odds. And if you think about it, my mom was a single mom. I was an only child, so we were a team from the very beginning. And she just wanted what it was good for her, for me, for her community. She was very politically active, super engaged in her community life. And she kind of gave me that powerful sense that no matter what the result, it's always worth trying and kind of fighting for what you want. And then, of course, after my mom, there were many people at school. I remember that I had an amazing teacher. His name is Juan Carlos Olmedo. And this guy was the one that told me, like, no matter how many people tell you that you should study finance because that's the future, and that you should study computer science or engineering because that's the future. If you want to go for the social science, if you feel like humanities are your thing, just go for that. And he totally convinced me to go to the right path, I believe, because I wouldn't be working with as much passion as I work now if I didn't love what I do. So he's definitely another person that gave me a lot of hope in moments that actually I was facing, not such a smooth reality, and that I had lots of trouble because my country had a humongous economic crisis and violence was on the rise. And, being a girl in a macho culture, it's also quite challenging. So always having these people that believe in you and that give you that particular hope is really what gets you going every single day, and that makes you feel very empowered, which to me is kind of like the core of what we do, and the reason why I feel so confident talking to other people and trying to convince them to engage in drug policy issues or human rights issues, or you name it.
That's awesome. Mom and a teacher. Great.
Yeah.
Great.
And definitely there's other type of idols. Somebody that I've never met, but that kind of transmitted that energy of this definition of continue going regardless of what happens next is Keith Richards, the leading guitar of the Rolling Stones.
Absolutely.
I know it's totally crazy, but I'm just so in love with the guy. And to me, that's one example of a guy that has been doing what he loves and literally rolling like a stone for 5 decades. Doing amazing stuff for the world, and I want to have a legacy at the end of my life, and I think that's a person that definitely has it. And in more political terms, I would say that former president of Uruguay, Jose Mujica, it's also that kind of leader that just brings an entirely new perspective and fresh air and gives you hope in every sense, and convince you that, for example, politics is not something just thieves do, and something that's actually quite useful and that has a community sense and that adds that public value that I was talking at the very beginning.
Well, now I want to talk to each one of those 4 people and interview them. Those are just great examples. And
Yeah,
maybe I'll start with Keith Richards. Not to insult your mom, but I mean...
Yeah, no, I mean, if you get him, please invite me.
Well, it'll be a 3-way conversation, I promise. That'd be great. Okay, question 3 then. Tell us about a time when you've had to use hope, the kind of hope you're talking about again, to really get through something in your own life. Kind of paint that picture. Take us back to that place.
I would say every single day. I will take my most recent history. I would, and the fact that, for example, you need that extra hope and you need to be that convinced about what you're doing, to actually keep on doing it every single day despite of the environment. More specifically, I do advocacy for drug policy reform in a country that's super engaged in a punitive-only strategy against drugs that's causing a lot of harm. But that particular strategy, it's actually quite popular amongst the public. And you can see that, for example, in countries like the Philippines at the moment, in which the president is just so convinced that drug users and people involved somehow in the drug chain are just not human beings, and they're not, they don't deserve any single rights or proper treatment from the authorities. It's actually an argument that wins a lot of support from the public, because we have been kind of programmed to think that drugs are bad and that only awful things come out of them, and that people that actually get in touch with them automatically drop school, like drop out of school or become thieves, or
All the stereotypes.
and yeah. So having every single day to wake up in the morning and try to convince the public of such counterintuitive argument that actually the war on drugs is much worse than the drugs themselves requires a lot of energy, requires a lot of commitment, but also requires a lot of hope. That hope that I was telling you about. I'm convinced that there are many other strategies and many other ways of actually dealing with drugs without saying that drugs are super good, that would be less harmful than the current strategy and that the current global policy. But you never know what the result is going to be, because you depend on a lot of political will. You depend on the support of public opinion that's not necessarily educated to think that way. You require a lot of work from your colleagues that are researching and that are producing the evidence to support that argument. And there's a bunch of elements that you need that are not necessarily there all the time, that gives you this feeling of never being certain of what the outcome's going to be, yet you're so convinced that this is what someone should be doing, and that at some point the entire population will agree with you, that you just keep on going. And so I get a lot of hope from my colleagues as well, of people that goes with you to meetings, and you come out of those meetings with very little resource and almost heartbroken, and then they share what they're researching, and they share their own experiences, and that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and that in the end it will be okay.
Yeah.
And if not, it's still worth fighting for it.
Great story. So many people are involved in so many great causes that don't seem to have enough support, but they're worth fighting for. And
Definitely.
great example. Yeah. So tell us, question 4, tell us about what you're doing today on a daily basis to share hope. So your resume is unbelievable. What you do sounds awesome, but how to put that in regular people terms for what does that look like for you on a daily basis? How are you actually delivering and a day in the life of Lisa sharing hope?
Well, it's actually quite simple, because if you start talking to people, and if you take them by the hand and start showing them not just the numbers and the hardcore evidence produced by think tanks and universities and other non-governmental organizations, but literally sharing with them your own story. For example, a story that I love to tell people that are not super involved in this political conversation that has a lot of jargon on itself, is that when I was born in Mexico City back in the 80s, children like me used to play out on the streets. Children nowadays are super restricted of actually going out on the streets, because you never know what can happen to them. When I was growing up, you can just, jump into your car and take the highway and go to the beach, 3 hours and a half ride to Acapulco. And then now Acapulco is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. And there's more homicides there than there are in Baghdad or in Kabul, in countries that are actually at war. And you didn't have military checkpoints by then in highways and roads. And now you do. So now, for example, if I had a child or a teenager and it would ask me for permission to go to the beach with their friends with no adult supervision, not by plane but by car, I will be actually very reluctant to let my children go. And that's what's happening to an entire generation here in my country. It's just children that are not allowed to be children, teenagers that are not allowed to be free to transit and enjoy their own country. And this is quite a visual and heartbreaking example of how this rhetoric of a war on drugs has actually militarized the country and has restricted our liberties, our rights, our freedoms, and it has disrupted our day-to-day lives. And what it looked like to be a Mexican back in the 80s and back in the 90s. And nobody's saying that drugs didn't exist back then. Sure. They, of course, did. Yeah. And drug cartels were also a reality, but this type of violence that's getting so normalized, that we see every single day on televisions, that we hear on the radio, that they made Netflix original series about, it's something that's actually getting very, getting very deep into our minds and our feelings, that we don't suffer anymore for our citizens, we don't suffer anymore for our countries, and we truly believe that this is something that we just need to get used to, and that's going to be there forever. So by telling other people these type of stories, I kind of want to transmit what it's like to fight for a cause that's not super popular, that doesn't have a lot of evidence, because it must be said, many of our institutions had been working for so many decades in producing evidence against drugs, but not necessarily evidence of the potential of drugs for either medical, scientific, or just recreational purposes. Nobody has spent that much time evaluating whether what we're doing is actually producing the results that we wanted. Nobody's measuring what's the impact on the life of regular people. It's only drugs cause schizophrenia or cause addiction or cause violence and other mental illnesses. And so I kind of wake up and I will take, for example, my mom has been ill for quite some time now. And so twice a week I take her to the hospital. And I always take the time to speak to the person sitting next to me while we were waiting and just try to figure out what they believe, what they think about the situation that they're living in, and then trying to share these type of little stories in order to try to make them click and connect at a human level, because tragedy has a human face. And so I try to convince them by doing that type of interventions or sharing my story in that level. But I also do more geeky stuff. I also do more professional stuff. I do research. I read a bunch of papers every single day, try to getting the most updated information from the countries or the jurisdictions that have tried alternative policies. I try to put that into briefings, and so we made a collection of briefings of the stories of Portugal and the Netherlands and the Czech Republics and the states of Colorado and Washington and many other jurisdictions that have tried other approaches, Switzerland, Turkey, whatnot, to show decision makers and to go to the media and share those evidence and share those best practices so they can also get convinced. And I also go and talk to my members of parliament. I go and I do some sort of soft lobbying to try to convince them to produce better laws. And I'm most of the times, at least once a week, I'm all over the media explaining either a new bill or a new program or a new argument. Try to connect the dots between the human rights movement and the drug policy movement.
Wow. And do you sleep?
I do sometimes. I travel a lot, so I also get to connect with many other people that are doing exactly what I do, but they're doing it with me and to me, you know? They're sharing their own perspectives, they're sharing their fears, they're sharing what stressed them, what makes them continue going in this path, and that's actually quite rewarding. So it's not only about seeing the ugly face of this war on drugs, but it's also very motivating to see the hope that many of the people around the world share, that another world is possible and that other policies will become reality eventually.
That's good stuff. It's good to know, and good for me to hear that there's actually some people out there who are maybe a decade ahead of you in the policy changes and are seeing something good come of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, love it. Okay, so question 5, what are some takeaways that we can have to work with here? So give me some simple ABC steps, some 1, 2, 3s of how I can share hope, and everybody over here in the Hope Nation that's listening along with me, how we can start doing something with hope right after we get done listening to you.
Well, it's very simple. I mean, there's many people to follow, many websites to visit, but I would recommend you to, if you're in Latin America or if you speak Spanish, go to the website of my organization. It's www.mucd.org.mx. If you speak English, go to the website of my other organization, which is www.tdpf.org.uk. And if not, just follow the hashtags, go on social media, try to Google some of the campaigns that had been produced. There was massive effort by hundreds of organizations that we were working on a global campaign towards the special session of the General Assembly of the United Nations back in April 2016, and it's called Stop the Harm. So if you Google that campaign, you can see the videos, you can join the conversation, you can connect with the people that were behind it. And there's also another campaign that I really love, that it's very visual and it's very useful for all of us to start sharing hope and make those videos viral, which is anyoneschild.org. And it's the stories of brothers, sisters, mothers, daughters, parents, grandparents that have lost someone on the war on drugs, that has lost someone to drugs or to bad drug policies, and they're sharing their stories in order to connect at this human level with other people and invite them to join the conversation. So that's a very easy way to do so. But it's also a very enlightening way in which we share those stories without, trying to blackmail you. It's not that we're trying to convince you by putting you to tears, but it's really to try to connect you to a face rather than connect you to a book or to a statistic or to a graph. So I would say that's a way. But there's, the other ways. And it's if you have a person in your family, in your community that's struggling with drugs, instead of stigmatizing him or her, try to be more supportive, try to go to the causes of what might be, motivating that use, try to connect him or her with services, try to talk to your peers and convince them that rejection is often the most harmful consequence of this particular problem. And then, of course, if you like politics and if you like to engage into a more complex conversation, of course, talk to your government, talk to your MPs, talk to your parliament. You will be surprised that there are many more people that are actually share this view, but they just don't dare to actually say it out loud because it's like coming out of the closet. It's very difficult. You risk losing credibility, support. You risk losing you risk losing your own networks and the work you've done to try to build some credibility. Sometimes people just dismiss that and automatically qualify you as a drug lover. So there's many different ways of sharing this hope, but I will give you those three.
That's good stuff. So here's what we're going to do, because a lot of people are listening and they don't have something to write down all this great information. So if you go to isharehope.com, click on Lisa Sanchez. Under the interview tabs, you'll see Lisa Sanchez. And we will put all of these links that we're talking about today, links to the YouTube if you want to watch this live, links to her websites, the videos, all those things she's given us. We're going to make sure all that is there. Also, any key quotes, things that she's said and told us, we want to make sure you've got it, ways to contact her. So, Lisa, how can we contact you? Facebook, Twitter, social media? What's the best way to be in touch?
Yeah, social media. If you want to talk about more organizational stuff, it's at MUCD on Twitter or at Transform Drugs, also on Twitter. And if you want to chat at a more personal level, it's at Liz Mary Baby on Twitter and Lisa Sanchez on Facebook.
Great. We'll put those on isharehope.com as well, again, under Lisa Sanchez's info. And if you want to hit us up on social media, we're going to post all of this. Also, Chris Williams HQ is my handle everywhere on social media, Chris Williams HQ. And I'll make sure we're blasting out all of this stuff that Lisa just told us there as well. Lisa, I can't thank you again. I can't thank you enough for not just spending 30 minutes with us, but for your insight and your involvement here on planet Earth. You're making a huge impact.
Thank you. I really hope that I transmitted some of my passion to the people that are listening. And I really wanted to thank you for having this type of project, because oftentimes we also need to listen to other people that are doing amazing stuff to get more motivating and share the hope.
Yeah, we do. Well, Lisa, let me ask you to do one thing before I let you go. We start each of the podcasts with a quote from you, and it goes something like, I'm Lisa Sanchez and I share hope. Or you could say, I'm Lisa Sanchez, I'm super awesome, I have more degrees than anybody, and I share hope. Whatever you want to say about yourself, just your name and I share hope, and whatever you want to sandwich in the middle.
All right, so I'm Lisa Sanchez, I'm Mexican, I'm fighting the war on drugs, and I share hope.
Perfect. That was great. A little more humble than I have more degrees than anybody else, too. Okay. So, Lisa, is there anything else I've missed that we need to make sure we include in the interview?
Some music from the Rolling Stones.
Love that.
No, and I just want to say that people out there, don't get disappointed. We will change these policies and we will change the world. Mexico and the entire Latin America is a region that has suffered a lot, but it's a beautiful region and has amazing people. And we're really working, we're doing our best to make things better.
I agree. I've traveled 4 or 5 times in Mexico and Central America. throughout that area, and it's just beautiful. The people are wonderful, and these issues are such a small piece of what goes on there. It shouldn't be the only thing that the international news wants to talk about.
Yeah, it doesn't define us.
No, it doesn't. I'm sure of that. I've seen that firsthand. You guys are fantastic. Okay, Lisa, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've just listened to iShare Hope. If you're ready to make a change, head to our website at isharehope.com and claim your free copy of the Top 10 Actions of Hope from World Leaders to use hope in your own life. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.